Welcome back to the Bible in Context. Hey, Nate.
This is where context is king and the original author's intent drives our interpretation.
Yeah, we're going to figure out what was the author doing with Jacob's dream about the ladder, or
Staircase.
Maybe a ziggurat.
Ziggurat.
All right, so we just finished up with Jacob. He's been sent out, kind of exiled from the Promised Land after he deceived Isaac and stole Esau's blessing. Rebekah, she has just sent him out as well and told him she's going to bring him back, and that was quite a presumptuous promise that she's not going to be able to carry through on. And now Jacob is on the run, on his way to Laban in Padan Aram, and he leaves Beersheba and starts heading towards Haran, and he's out in the wilderness, and he comes to it says a certain place, doesn't really tell us where yet, just as the sun had set, and he takes one of the stones laying out in the field and he goes to sleep on it. And so this is not he's not staying at a habitable place. He's out in just the middle of nowhere and uses a rock for a pillow, which is not uncommon actually in Egypt. Have you seen those little stone headrests that they use to sleep on?
No.
It looks horrible.
Yeah.
It's just a little U shape that you put your head in and you lay back, and it's like a couple inches off the ground. So it's kind of like a pillow, but it's made of stone. It has a U shape on it to keep your head straight.
I'd have to grow a lot of hair, get some padding or something.
It seems horrible. I don't know how they slept like that, but that was the way the rich people slept in Egypt. So,
yeah, we are very spoiled here.
Yeah, and anyway, so I mean, the stone's not uncommon, but I don't think that this was, he wasn't sleeping on a nice stone. He picked a rock up out of a field and laid his head on it. So he's on the run, and he goes to sleep and has a dream where he sees a staircase. A lot of your translations will say a ladder. It's just a sulam. It's just a ramp, a stepped ramp, a flight of stairs. And the point is, I think what we're going to see here is that this staircase up into heaven is going to be a reverse mirror of the Tower of Babel. Because what were they trying to do at the Tower of Babel?
They were trying to make a name for themselves by building a tower to bring Yahweh down to them to bless them.
Right. And maybe even another deity.
Or possibly another deity, yeah.
Yeah, just maybe some random spirit that they could get a hold of and bring him down to bless their camp.
Yeah.
And what we see here in verse 12 of chapter 28 is, look at this ladder, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. The word angels there is just, the messengers of God were ascending and descending on it. And so the people who were his emissaries that go out to carry out God's will on the earth, they're going up and down on this ladder, doing God's will, coming to earth to, help people, go back, whatever. They're called messengers, so they just do what he has them do. But it's just kind of ironic here, I think, that they were trying to bring a deity down to bless them, and here God's servants, they're just freely going up and down on this staircase that Jacob sees. And so this is an effective reality of what they wanted at Babel, but this one is God's true staircase to the heavens and back.
Right.
And in this dream, whenever he sees the staircase into heaven, this sort of right version of the ziggurat of chapter 11, it says in verse 13, and behold, Yahweh stood above it. So this is Yahweh's staircase, the one that he intended and the one that he built. And he says, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So again, we just heard the Abrahamic blessing come from Isaac and get put on Jacob in the last episode and last chapter. And here we see it directly coming from God. Again, the same thing that he told to Abraham. You're going to dwell in this land. You and your children are going to own it. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And that has been the promise that we've had since Genesis 12 when God said that to Abraham. So, again, Jacob is in this. Jacob is following in the blessed footsteps of Abraham as the elect.
Do you think this is the angel of the Lord at the top of the ziggurat?
Here it just says Yahweh.
I know, but he's standing.
Oh,
like
because
human.
it's anthropomorphized?
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, probably so. I mean, And just for those of you who are maybe jumping into this and don't know what we're talking about, there's a lot of passages where you see two different Yahwehs, one who's speaking and one who's a visible angel of the Lord. There's a really good book by Matt Foreman and Douglas Van Dorn, The Angel of the Lord. And they go through and show how the angel of the Lord, the presence of Yahweh, the face of Yahweh, the word of Yahweh, these are all different ways to describe a second anthropomorphized version or person of Yahweh. And as Christians, that should sound familiar. That's what we see who Jesus is.
Yeah, and they do a good job in the book making connections from the angel of the Lord right to Jesus.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of arguments when people will say that, but they don't really have a good basis for it. They do a really good job at it, and make actual textual connections. And so, yeah, that's a good thought, though, whenever we see Yahweh here standing anthropomorphized, maybe we are seeing another instance of the angel of the Lord.
Yeah, so potentially this is the pre-incarnate Christ.
Right, and not the Father who John says no one has ever seen.
Right.
So Yahweh goes on speaking in verse 15 as well, where he says, I am with you, I will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back from this land. And there's a bit of an irony here in a way where he is on his way out, and we talked about last time how Isaac probably should have kept Jacob in the land, because that's what Abraham did with Isaac, and Abraham understood the promises are tied to this land. This is where we need to stay. Well, Jacob's deception, Rebekah's deception, Isaac's lack of faith, Esau's hostility has really just screwed everything up, and now Jacob's on his way out of the land. And it's interesting to me here that the last time someone was headed out of the land was Isaac, as he was headed out from the famine to go down to Egypt. And God tells him, no, stay with the Philistines, stay in this area. And here, we see in the Jacob story, Yahweh says, go ahead, it's fine, but I'm going to bring you back here. Yeah, and this is actually going to happen again later, so just another strange reversal in the Jacob story, where this time and also whenever Jacob is heading out of the famine to go to Egypt to meet Joseph later in Genesis, Yahweh condones his exit of the promised land. So just another, again, weird reversal, but each time God promises, I'm going to bring you back here. I feel like I need to do some more thinking on the purpose behind that as a kind of a little reversal motif within the Jacob story. But that's definitely something we see going on here that's been different from the story so far. I mean, there's a lot different in this story. There's a lot of reversals. I've said that about 20 times now, but a lot of reversals in the Jacob story. And God has just promised to be with him before he brings him back. And I think, again, this brings me immediately to Moses at the burning bush, whenever Moses doesn't want to go to Pharaoh, and God says, I will be with you. And that's what he bases his name off of. He says that he will be with him, Ehyeh. And that's why he gives his name as Yahweh, he who is.
So yeah, I think you made a good connection between this and the burning bush, because you see, just like Moses was in the wilderness, kind of, in a sense, cast out into the wilderness after he had murdered the Egyptian. And so here we have Jacob being kind of cast out into the wilderness in a sense, and he has a burning bush moment.
Yeah, and this is where God appears to them for the first time.
Yeah, this is the first appearance that Jacob has of God. And yeah, so I think this is very much like that burning bush moment. Yeah.
And so then Jacob wakes up and says, okay, God must be in this place. And so
he manifests himself
right
in certain places in a special way, though. And I think this is similar to like Hagar and her situation, where she calls that well, or that area,
Bir Lahai-Roi.
Yeah.
This might be another point where I've heard this talked about a lot, is like, and this may have just been a couple of references, but where Jacob thinks like this is where God stays all the time, and I didn't realize I just walked into his house. That's why he calls the place Bethel, House of God.
House of God. But, well, I need to call it the gate of heaven here.
Right, but I wonder if we should be seeing this more as like, he shows up with Hagar, he shows up to meet Abraham outside of the land in Haran, and so God moves around, and Jacob sees, God has been in this place. He was here with me, and I didn't realize it. And so this is where he had the dream. He sets up a pillar with a stone he was sleeping on, and makes it a monument of this place where he saw God, and wants to commemorate this as God's house where he dwells. Just another point, going back to Babel real quick, in verse 17, where he says, this is none other than the house of God. It is the gate of heaven. And I think that, again, mirrors Babel, because do you remember what Babel means in Akkadian? Like the original language of of the Babylonians.
You've told me this. I can't remember.
So it means gate of the gods.
That's right.
And so here we don't have the man-made gate of the gods. We have God's true gate into heaven.
Right.
So again, I think the author is actually playing with that, and so
this is definitely like he's talking about this place as being like holy ground, like take off your sandals. Very similar language. The word "awesome," how awesome is this place? It seems to be connected with a place of holiness or a majestic.
Fearful.
How fearful. Exodus 15:11. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, deeds doing wonders? And so there's this connection that he's making here to say, like, this is very much like a burning bush place where you take off your sandals. This is like the general of the Lord's army. Yeah, Joshua, take off your sandals moment, because the Lord's presence is in this place, and that's his emphasis.
Yeah, I think Jacob does have an idea here that God has been hanging out here and set up here, but he also understands that God's promise is going to go with him. God's going to go with him and travel along with him.
Yeah. Well, and it tells you just how real the dream must have been, too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what he saw in his dream felt so real that he names this place that he's in. This is the gate of heaven.
And I wonder if... So, Bethel has some important history to it, and it might be worth bringing up. I haven't fully thought through all of this, but it's a podcast. Whatever. So, the significance of Bethel later on, we see it a few times in Judges. It's associated with the prophet Deborah, where she dwells at. It's where Israel comes to inquire of the Lord in Judges 20. It's where the ark stays in Judges 20. And it's also associated with Samuel's prophetic activity in the book of Samuel, or the books of Samuel. And it actually became in the books of Kings, where the southern border of the northern kingdom of Israel was, and it became the southern worship site of the golden calves that were set up to keep Israel worshiping in the north and not going down to Jerusalem. And so some positive and negative associations there. And some have wondered if this is a place, or if this story was used to kind of back up the thought that this is a holy place where the northern tribes will set up their temple. I don't really know if that's the case, but we do see just some significant places associated with Yahweh's presence later in this story, even though it's established by one of the most backwards patriarchs that we have. And so I just wonder, ultimately, the place that Yahweh sets his name is his choice, and he chooses Jerusalem, and there's some precursor to that in Genesis itself. But I don't know if we should read too much into, this occurrence of Bethel makes this a special place that is like the house of God throughout the canon.
Yeah, it is interesting. In chapter 31, we're going to read about how God says, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. Right. And then in chapter 35, God says to Jacob, arise and go to Bethel and dwell there, and make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. And so he's going to keep coming back to this place.
Yeah, it's very central. I mean, this is like the house of God in Jacob's story. Right. After this, it kind of leaves off, and maybe we'll come back to it again in the Judges period. And maybe there's some kind of typological connection between this passage and Judges. I would love to look into that, but I don't really know offhand. And so Jacob, after he has set up this pillar and anointed this place to be God's house, to be Bethel, he then says, if God will be with me where I go and will keep me along the way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then Yahweh shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's house. So here we see Jacob interacting with God in a way that is conditional, trying to act as though he can make a deal with him. If God will do this for me, then I'll make him my God, and I'll give him a tenth of all that I have. I'll give him a tithe. And so Jacob he's not acting as a faithful guy. I think to him, he may have stumbled upon a God and decided, hey, if you're powerful enough to do all this stuff for me, then I'll make you my God, because I know I can be protected by you. He's not thinking at all with the covenant faithfulness that Yahweh has shown to his fathers so far. All right, well, after this, he journeys on to Paddan Aram, where he meets Laban, and another betrothal journey narrative scene begins. And so we'll pick up with that in chapter 29 when we come back together.
Sounds like a plan.